How the Korean War created Samsung. Samsung, one of the leading tech companies in the world. Unlike some of its American competitors, like Apple or Dell, Samsung was not formed in someone's garage or a college dorm room. No, Samsung emerged in the wake of the most destructive war in Korean history. In this video, we'll see all that carnage paved the way for Samsung's global domination. Before we get started, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the notifications bell. The first half of the 20th century was not very kind to Korea, to say it mildly. After 100 years of political interference, the Japanese Empire had reduced Korea to merely a puppet state, formally annexing it in 1910. As you can imagine, the Japanese occupation was brutal, with many Korean farmers and businessmen being driven off their lands and out of their factories. As an ambitious colonial power, Japan was eager to sell Korea with its own people, which is why Japanese ownership of Korean land, for example, skyrocketed from 8% in 1910 to over 50% just 20 years later. For a time, it seemed as if the Korean nation was destined. For oblivion. For the Japanese not only forced the Koreans to change their names, they also prohibited schools from even teaching the language. It took the crushing Japanese defeat during the Second World War for Korea to become independent once again in 1945, despite the chaos of American and Soviet military administration. The people of Korea were cautiously optimistic. One such optimist was Lee Byung-chul, who was one of the few Koreans to have luckily started their own business during the Japanese occupation. He had created a small transportation company in 1938 called Samsung, which specialized in exporting groceries. From the very start, Samsung had a very big competitive advantage. It was located in Masan, a city on the southeastern coast that the Japanese were using as their biggest exit. While Samsung's Japanese period was decent for its time, newly independent South Korea presented immense opportunities for Lee. The years immediately after the liberation were very profitable for pretty much every Korean businessman for a simple reason. While the Japanese administrators were gone, their assets remained in the government, and the Korean government was handing them out left and right for cents on the dollar in an effort to rebuild the country. Everything looked great for Samsung, but then the Korean War broke out. North Korea's invasion quickly turned into a proxy war between the Soviet bloc and the capitalist West, with modern weapons devastating major cities and industrial centers in South Korea. Most of Korea's factories were damaged during 3 long years of war, for example. Over 60% of textile and chemical facilities were outright destroyed, as was half of the country's rail. At the end of the war, Korea's infrastructure was in desperate need of repair, and its companies were too young to sustain its economy. Prices rose dramatically as the South Korean government was forced to print more money to finance the country's vast military expenditures. Hyperinflation was so extreme that in July 1953, Korea's money circulation was 24 times greater than just 3 years earlier. The future of South Korea and Samsung by extension was looking increasingly uncertain, but luckily for them, Uncle Sam had their back. After the war, the US created essentially the Korean version of the Marshall Plan, with the United Nations following suit soon after. Throughout the 1950s, $3 billion were sent to the Korean government, which then chose the medium and large companies worthy of the investment. Samsung was among the companies to benefit from this relief aid, no doubt, thanks to Lee's close friendship with the first South Korean president. In fact, the extent of state help that Samsung received during this year was mind-boggling. While usually imposing very strict limits on exports, the government essentially gave Samsung a free pass, allowing it to become the biggest exporter of scrap iron. For example, after the war, funneling American relief money into Samsung allowed it to expand beyond simple transport. Under the new administration, the Korean economy opened up and focused on massive export growth, for which Samsung was perfectly positioned after a decade of state-funded preparation. Thus, despite a second regime change in the span of 15 years, Lee was once again in the good graces of the Korean government. The most popular Samsung division, which we now know today, was of course also created with the aid of the government In 1969, the government passed legislation reducing taxes by 50% on companies operating in the electronic business, which at the time was pretty much only Samsung Electronics, which created the very same year. During the 1970s, Samsung became a symbol of Korean modernization as it helped bring televisions and washing machines to the homes of every family. And then on to the semiconductors, and more recently, smartphones. Of course, none of this would have been possible without Lee's close friendship with the government. Thank you for watching, everybody. Make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell. And make sure you comment down below what you think about this video. Thank you for watching.